All right, welcome back to another episode of Phoenix Edge. This is an RPG and gaming news podcast. My name is Hat.
And I'm Stan.
And today we are going to be answering your Discord questions. But before we get into that, as you can see, it's just going to be me and Stan this episode. Eric was unable to join us. He's a little busy tonight, but he should be back next week. But like I said, we are going to be answering your questions from Discord. So we've selected 4 questions in order that they came for this episode. So up today we have from Joker, what are some RPGs that you hated and yet you would still go back to play occasionally, or an RPG that is a guilty pleasure of yours? Then we have from Demosthenes, as veteran RPG players, what's your opinion on Timesinks and games? Then we have from Valvedrix, who says, when it comes to 3D graphics, do you prefer a realistic style used by Final Fantasy and Western RPGs, or stylized anime graphics, something like Dragon Quest and Persona? And finally, from Perry Dice, we have, what video game have you beaten that you consider a hidden gem? We're going to record these questions separately tonight and then splice them together in the order that they flow the best. So if you would like to know the specific order, look in our description of this episode and we'll have time codes so that way you can check that out. Let's move on to the questions. It's from Valvedrix, who asks, or says, I have a question about presentation. When it comes to 3D graphics, do you prefer a realistic style used by Final Fantasy and Western RPGs, as an example, or stylized anime graphics, something like Dragon Quest and Persona? So this is an interesting question. We've kind of had a different type of question with this before. Just to real quickly reemphasize my take on just the graphics issue, and then I'll comment on what Valvedrix is asking here. But I strongly prefer games to utilize whatever graphics works best for their vision, right? So if your vision of your game would be most realized or best realized with hyper-realistic graphics, something like Cyberpunk, then okay, go that route, because that's what I want from that. That would be the best vision for your game, your story, everything. It just works better with that in mind. But then I was playing a game called I think it's called Ion Fury, and it uses like this Duke Nukem 3D look from like the 90s, but it's like in 1440p on my PC, and it's fantastic. Like, it uses the same graphics, but the levels are gigantic. It's a first-person shooter. And I don't think that game would be nearly as fun if it wasn't in that graphic style, because that's the whole environment or the type of feel, but it's the way they want to present the game, right? It's the way they're trying to convey something to you. It's an art form. So I think that whatever works best for your game is the most ideal way. But to really get at the heart of Valvedrix's question here, I'm gonna sit there and say, how about instead of Final Fantasy, let's just say something like Witcher 3, which is a Western RPG, and something like Persona, because I think that Final Fantasy is, even Final Fantasy 15, Final Fantasy 7 Remake, they're definitely going more towards the Western route, but I think that they're still very JRPG, right? Like,
yeah.
Noctis still has those big eyes. Gladio walks around with no shirt, with his abs showing. You know, that's kind of JRPG. You know, with Noctis's hair, of it looking very Goku-like. It's not very Western, but it is more in that realistic style. So I'm honestly really torn.
Same. Like, this was a close one.
Yeah, I'm really torn because, for example, with Persona, I mean, even with the art style, if you talk about something that's unrelated, like the UI, well, then of course I prefer the Persona style because that immerses me in the scenery. It's part of the art aesthetic because the UI just kind of like splashes across the screen and it just meshes well with the background of the game. And a lot of JRPGs focus on things like that to try to keep you immersed in the game. Whereas a lot of Western RPGs like Skyrim, you pop open the menu, it'll be like a Microsoft Excel document, right?
Right. Yeah.
It's not, it like kind of like, whoa, like Jesus Christ, what am I looking at? So like Persona just has, and a lot of JRPGs just have a sense of style that I think Western RPGs tend to not have. In Persona 5, you have the character. Have you ever played Persona 5?
I have not played that one yet. I played Persona 4 though, the golden version, which also kind of is
Very similar.
very similar. Yeah.
Okay. And well, because I just most recently played Persona 5, and I actually like that one better than Persona 4. But I'm sure you've seen it in some of the promotional artwork, but there's kind of like the sidekick, but he's got blonde, kind of spiky hair, and he's kind of kind of like walks like this. But his name's Ryuji Sakamoto. I can't ever say his name right. But anyways, he's got blonde hair, kind of like a punk rock dude. And if you look at like his character design and then compare it to somebody that's in like a Western RPG, it's completely contrasted. Like it's a completely different take because his style, he's like this very like lanky looking character with like super long legs. He's got these like very like casually drop down plaid pants, but then he wears this like school jacket that's like really loose and doesn't really quite fit. And he's got these like suspenders that kind of hang off. He doesn't wear them like they're supposed to. And when he walks, he just walks like this. And he's very like closed off. And you know what type of character he is, his personality, just from looking at the character, the way he's dressed, the way he walks. But then when you look at like a Western RPG like Geralt of Rivia from Witcher 3, he just walks, you know, like his profession. He's a Witcher. And that he just walks like you would expect a swordsman to walk. That's it. You don't have any idea of who he is though. Like, does he have a sense of humor? Is he a dick? You don't know any of these things, right? He's just a Western, even like Skyrim, because you're creating your own character. It's just a generic character walk. And a lot of times the attire in Western RPGs is more geared towards the profession. You know, Geralt is a Witcher, so what would Geralt wear and what types of armor would he wear? And you know, and I kind of like that because in Witcher 3, like Yennefer, she'll wear a cloak if she's trying to hide her identity, right? Or she'll wear armor if she needs to or whatever. But it's not like a JRPG where you'll wear a wedding dress in the combat, right? But that's just in the JRPG, that's just accenting that character's personality. So I feel like there's a lot of body language and personality that's endowed in like the art style of JRPGs that you don't really get out of Western RPGs. But sometimes I do like that realism you get out of Western RPGs because it's more grounded in kind of like realism and just it's less likely to take me out of it. But when JRPGs do it right, like it's really, really good. I really, really like it. So
you're
I know I just
leaning,
regurgitated like so much. Sorry.
Well, you're leaning towards the stylized version, it sounds like.
Well, the thing is,
if you have to pick one, like,
yeah, the thing is, honestly, the thing is with JRPGs, when it goes wrong, it goes really wrong because
that's true.
You like Xenoblade Chronicles 2, you have the like little girl with giant boobs and like a bikini or whatever. And like, I don't like that. Like, don't do that, you know?
Yeah.
But other times it's really cool looking. You know, when I look at like Astral Chain or something like that, which I don't even know if, I guess that kind of qualifies not as an RPG, but kind of towards the Japanese side of things. Like it's very stylized and just very, like, just, I don't know how else to explain it. Whereas a lot of times you look at Western games and it's just like Aloy in Horizon Zero Dawn, when she talks, her eyebrows just move up and down when she talks in like the same repeated pattern. And it's just like, well, no, I want some more character than just like a 3D model that like moves its mouth up and down. Like, give me something else, you know? But those games usually have better dialogue. So to get to your point, I think I do veer more towards the stylized look of JRPGs when done right. So
yeah, it's pretty much the same for me. Like, I really enjoy games pushing for realism, and in terms of like the characters, like proportional, like to get them closer and closer to like looking like an actual human being,
So
and then appropriately like dressing them that way as well, like in the style, like making it more grounded, to match the technology, like you're saying. Were
okay,
you gonna say
so
something?
well, yeah, I was gonna say, so you prefer the stylized like JRPG look, but more proportional, like more realistic, or you prefer the Western route, or are you
Well,
taking a different approach to it?
I prefer the way the question is phrased is it says like, do you prefer more realistic style
Mm-hmm.
or like stylized or kind of an anime aesthetic?
Right.
And I'm like split, like I'm in the middle like you, but I am leaning slightly towards the stylized graphics, just because there's a great variety of ways in which you can stylize anime even, right? Like I think of a game like Valkyria Chronicles, right, which is anime. It's most definitely anime, but it has like kind of a storybook like aesthetic to it. Like you can see like sketch lines like in the environments and stuff. So it's almost like a storybook come to life kind of feel to the graphics. That's different than if I just play like the next Tales game, for example.
Right. Right.
Or like if I play Dragon Quest, it's anime, but it's Akira Toriyama's anime style, which is distinct from a lot of other anime.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you could go on, like there's also like uh, more of the chibi aesthetic, right? Like the characters with like the huge heads and eyes and
I
everything,
don't
but
like
like
that
the
at all.
tiny little body. I don't like it either, but I like that it exists, for other people who enjoy that. So that's kind of thing. Like if you're targeting realism, like to make characters like proportional and look like human beings, and you're like fighting the, like you kind of mentioned with Horizon, the uncanny valley, right? Where sometimes like things don't animate how a real person would look like when they speak or when they move. You know,
Right.
you're always fighting those things if you're pushing realism, because people know how real life looks like very, very well. They're very familiar with it. So if you're pushing a realistic aesthetic, the developer is trying to match it up with real life as much as possible, and that's like one style. You're conforming kind of the graphics and the animation to what exists in real life. Whereas if I can choose an anime aesthetic and go in many different directions. You know what I mean? Like if you think of a game like Okami,
Okay.
that game, as long as it's at a good resolution and a good frame rate, will look good forever. you know,
That's true.
because it's
That's very
it's like
true.
it's like a watercolor painting come to life versus someday, I hate to say this, but someday The Witcher 3 in its present form, although they keep updating it and making it look better and better, but like someday The Witcher 3 will not look good in terms of realism.
It's always going to look good, Stan. Always.
Well, okay, like
No, no, that's
someday Skyrim will not look good,
no,
right?
that's true. Have you tried logging into Skyrim recently?
No.
Yeah, dude, I have it downloaded on my Switch, and I bought it to like play with my nephews and stuff because they like Skyrim. And I first time I opened it, I hadn't played it in years, and I remember my mind thinking like, "Oh, these graphics are good. This is the remastered version." And I was looking
Hmm.
at these NPCs, and I was like, "These don't look like people. Like they don't. They're like very like Jesus Christ." Was I? Well, then does that in my mind that wasn't that long ago. So I agree. Witcher
Yeah.
3 is going to get that zone probably sooner than I like. So
Yeah, it's so I mean, it's kind of unfair to like realism and Western RPGs that target realism as the aesthetic,
mhm.
because that's just one style. And then the way the question is phrased is like I'm comparing it to anime, which has probably like a dozen, right,
Well,
or more different styles. So
and the way I
I
looked at it was I saw anime graphics and I thought, okay, well, like JRPGs.
Tales, Persona,
because
right?
anime is Japanese, right?
Yeah.
So that's the way I looked at it. Anime, graphics, Japanese. So that's why I said, okay, well, Final Fantasy, even Final Fantasy 15, even Final Fantasy 16 is still very, very Japanese, but it is going for that more realistic look, even though it's not going for realistic looking people because people don't look like that in real life,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, so it's kind of a tricky question, and that's why I was like split in the middle because like we mentioned like chibi anime aesthetic.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, I prefer realism over that anime aesthetic all the time,
Yeah.
like every day, because I'm just not into that one.
Yeah.
But then if it's like a Persona game, then that's like, ooh, that's like a little that's closer because they, like you mentioned, they have different strengths and weaknesses to them. So, but yeah, what ended up breaking the tie for me, I guess, is just the fact that there's so many different ways to present um, anime or like a non-realistic aesthetic versus a Western aesthetic or like a realism aesthetic, like Kingdom Come Deliverance or something, right? Like the, you can only change the setting. So like you can change like Mass Effect, right? Looks great. It's targeting realism. So does Witcher 3, so does Kingdom Come Deliverance, and they're like targeting a different they're all targeting realism, but they
Mm-hmm.
use a different setting, right? One's like historical fantasy, one's fantasy, and then one is science fiction fantasy kind of setting. So like they have to differentiate the setting to try and make it not seem like just generic fantasy, you know.
I think that, yeah, you're bringing up a good point about the longevity of the games.
Mm-hmm.
I think, well, it was kind of an earlier point too, was just that these games are going to look better when they're stylized and more on the anime route in the future, as opposed to these games that look phenomenal now. And then down the road, they're going to
Oh,
look aged. It's kind of the CGI problem with movies where too much CGI in a movie looks great at launch. And in 3 or 4 years, it looks like CGI, right?
yeah.
It's kind of a problem. I guess that like specifically talking about style though, I do really appreciate very well stylized Western RPGs that have a very cohesive idea about what the architecture is going to be and just like the type of style of the clothing and
Yeah,
everything
yeah.
like that. Like Cyberpunk I've talked about. I won't go on a 10-minute rant about how great that open world is, but it's just so well realized in the way that it's imagined. And I know that one day it blows my mind, but one day that's going to look old and dated. But there's something there, despite that, with just how realistic and just it does walk the uncanny valley a little bit with just how close it is to stuff that I've experienced in real life, but
Mm-hmm.
also still its own thing. And even good medieval games like Witcher 3, they do walk that fine line where there's enough attention to detail within the world itself that I think it's something to applaud and appreciate. And despite the fact that it's going to look like dog crap, 5 years from now. So, and honestly, a lot of times it's just even with more Japanese stylized anime graphics, for a broad umbrella term, sometimes those graphics don't look good to people 10 years from now, despite the fact that it's not really a texture issue. It's just despite the fact that, it's not very detailed back then, it's more stylized. It's just because preferences have changed, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like some people don't like the way older anime looks, despite
True.
the fact that they had all the technology to draw current day anime. It's just a preference of style too. So I don't know. I mean, I do still think though that the there's something about a good JRPG stylized game where, the characters are very dramatic in their movements. They're very expressive. I don't have to guess through like a wooden face. about what's going on. And it's just, sometimes I just like over exaggerated settings and characters to just kind of contrast my day-to-day life, So
Yeah.
I don't know if that's too much all over the place, but it
No,
depends on
it
my
makes
mood.
sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes sense. They both have their strengths and weaknesses, and both versions are kind of providing something else.
Yeah.
Like it's just a different.
I
It's good.
just,
Like you want to have more variety of stuff. I just think there's like a better variety of the anime or like stylized graphics than there is realism. Like realism is you're kind of pigeonholing yourself into one lane
yeah.
versus, like I mentioned, there's dozens and dozens of different variety of anime style that can be used. And so I mean, I really love the realistic settings. Like I love seeing them push graphics,
Hmm.
to as close as they can, and then trying to deal with those uncanny valley issues. Like I'm looking forward to the next Horizon Zero Dawn game. It's based on the little we've seen from it. It looks fantastic. But I'm also looking forward to the next Tales game. But like for different reasons.
Right, right, right.
So
Exactly.
yeah,
It's almost like I just wish they would like borrow things from each other, you know?
yeah. But
Because,
I don't know if you have like a person in a realistic proportions, like realistic setting, and they're like
well,
doing like anime poses. It's kind of it's jarring.
right. So I don't want, I mean, I don't know. It would be kind of cool if after Geralt defeated a monster, he just would like wave his sword around in the air like it was Final Fantasy VII. I could get down on that. But I think that when you go for that more realistic look, like more realistic textures, and you're worried about that side of things, you tend to think about things like you're bringing up in a more realistic fashion where how would this look? And they even had to address that with the 7 remake. They said they had to reimagine Midgar a little bit because in the goofy fashion it made sense that Aerith's house had this garden underneath this
Yeah,
plate, right? With this river. But where does this river connect to? How does this all work? So they had to reimagine things in the more realistic graphics on the PS4. So I think that there's certain things you have to think about when you make a game that looks like, just more realistic, right? But it makes you think about things that just make sense also because when Geralt and Yennefer are going to a party or, a ball or whatever, Geralt has to change clothes and he has to wear a nice outfit and he has to wear a party mask and you can pick the mask and Yennefer will wear a nice dress and like her hair will be different. But in
mm-hmm.
a JRPG, you're just like, I'm going in my armor, because it's just like you don't think about stuff like that. And you wear the same outfit the whole game. And
Yeah,
that's not necessarily a stylized thing with the graphics. I think it's just you don't think about it as much. And so they don't do it. So
yeah,
I guess that's what I mean when I think like I wish they could borrow things from each other. But
that makes sense. Yeah,
anyways, ready to move on to our our next question?
yep. Let's do it.
Cool. Moving on. All right, for our next question here, we have from Demosles who asks, as veteran RPG players, what's your opinion on time sinks in games? I've seen some players, especially working adults, not like when they think a game wastes their time, whether by long form design or just mechanics that slows play down. There's also the development of some games like the recent Genshin Impact that use a microtransaction formula. So after the first 20-ish hours of gameplay, it starts to entice the player to spend money in order to speed up play again by getting better characters to play as. Any opinions on those sort of games that more maliciously waste your time by design? Stan, what do you got?
So tackling, I guess, the first part of the question, just time
Okay.
sinks in general. When I was younger, like a game lasting a long time was really great because I had a limited income, at least. Well, I still have a limited income, but much more limited than than I do now as an adult, right?
Right.
And so, yeah, I purchased a game and I probably saved up for weeks or maybe even months to afford that game. And so I wanted it to last a really long time because I'd be building up my funds again to be able to buy the next game, or I get a game for my birthday or for Christmas time, right? Something rare, right? It happens 4 or 5 times a year. So I want my games to last longer. So, I used to think something like Final Fantasy 12 taking like 100 plus hours, maybe even like 120 hours to complete
It was like a selling point.
was like, was like a selling point. But now that I'm an adult, like replaying Final Fantasy 10 instead of 12 is like much more appealing because it's point A to B, right? Like you just go from point A to point B, you fight battles, level up your characters, and watch the cutscenes. That's how it works. That's the game loop, and you can finish it in 40, 50 hours. And even that's pushing it, assuming you don't do all the end game nonsense, which is just a giant grind.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah. So that's my thoughts on just the first part, Timesinks. Like, I'm less of a fan of them now. However, like, they still have their place because there's people playing games or getting into games that were in the position I was, before, where, they can only afford to purchase between 2 and 6 games a year.
That's an interesting point that you bring up, though, that I didn't even think about, because I didn't even think about it from the angle of being young and not having any money and just wanting that game to last until you can get another one.
Yeah.
And it probably played into the fact that some of these gameplay loops that you played that were just created to waste more time, it's probably decently entertaining when it's the first time you've seen that, right? It's the first time you've experienced RNG and you're like, oh, this is amazing. This can go on forever, Whereas when it's, as you get older, you've seen the same gameplay loop a billion times. So
right.
when I play even something popular like Animal Crossings, I can already see the gameplay loop and I can tell where I'm going to be 50 hours from now or 100 hours from now. And like, I just don't like it. I like, there's no uncertainty. I just, I can see where I'm going to be and I don't like it.
Yeah. Yeah. Those sim games like Animal Crossing or like The Sims or something like that. Yeah. Those are great time wasters or time killers, however you want to think about it.
Civilizations 5.
Oh yeah.
I like, anytime I start that up, I just know, like, okay, it's 6 p.m. right now. I'm starting this thing up. It'll be 5 o'clock in the morning and I'll still be jacking with this. And then I'll just get tired and go to bed and I'll never open it again.
Yeah.
Like, anyways.
Yeah. Like I'm currently playing a game that Hat actually recommended a while back, Fell Seal Arbiter's Mark.
Oh yeah.
On the Switch.
Is that a time sink for you?
Well, I'm very close to the end of the game.
Okay.
But it took me 70 hours to get there. And it was 70 hours of pretty much like the same. I mean, like, the game gives you lots and lots of options.
Yeah.
As far as like customizing your characters, which is really great. But kind of at the midway point or so of the game, so maybe 30, 35 hours in, I had my characters all set up like the way I wanted them. Like, I had chosen, like, this is my wizard, this is my healing character, this is my knight.
What difficulty setting are you playing this on? I'm just curious.
I am playing it on hard, so that's probably making it. Maybe I'm making it harder on myself, probably. Yeah,
because that game does have permadeath as well. Well, they have the injury system. That's the version I played, so it has a lot of different options you can adjust to really make your own experience.
Yeah, that's really great in that regard. Actually, you can highly customize the difficulty you want.
Yeah.
But yeah, just using it as an example, it's not really a time sink, but it's a game I think I probably would have enjoyed more if I got to the end at like 45 hours, instead of 70 hours.
Right.
That's a little ridiculous. I got to the point where I thought it was the end and it was like, oh no, there's like 5, 6 more missions to go, and preparing for those missions and executing them takes like an hour each, or at least that's what it feels like,
Yeah.
So it's a good game. It's just it's a little too long for me. Yeah.
Well, I mean, we have that in lots of different things. It's like a Netflix series that goes 3 seasons too long, or like a
Oh yeah.
3.5 hour movie that should have been 2 hours. I mean, after a while, you start to get, fatigued with this just continuing on. You just want to finish. And then the idea of replaying is just unsurmountable, the idea that you're going to sit back through that. But I mean, I totally get you from the point of view that, uh, when it feels like they're just inflating the time just to make it go longer. I
Yeah.
think that's really where I most get annoyed. The example pointed out here by Demosthenes, I understand with Genshin Impact, and I know that's just an example, but those types of games don't really drive me. I don't get that annoyed with those types of games because I already know what to expect before I go into there. So with Genshin
Mhm.
Impact, I didn't spend a single dime at all. And I got 35 hours out of it, which is almost twice the length of the story version of Final Fantasy 15 at launch, right? To
Yeah.
just go from beginning to end at launch, it was around 19 to 20 hours. And I got 35 hours out of Genshin Impact, and I didn't spend a single dime. And I
Yeah.
was okay with just, okay, I had fun with it. Now I'm done. Now I'm moving on. And I don't have a problem with that. I know some people get like really invested in this idea that when any game they play, they have to beat. And I
Yeah.
get it because I can be that way too sometimes, but I I don't have a problem with dropping a game if I'm just okay. I had my fun with it, and then now I'm done. So those types of microtransaction games, if I'm going to play them, I'm going to play them for as long as I want, and then once it's run its course, I leave, and I don't spend any money, so I don't really get that annoyed by it. But I do get annoyed with what you're talking about, which is just games that inflate the game just to try to market a longer game, right, on their promotional page or whatever.
Yeah.
One example that really comes to mind though is Final Fantasy 13. I know you're not a 13 fan, but you kind of, it's not the worst game to you, but it's in the lower areas. But
By,
you'll
by,
spend some
by,
time defending it.
I feel like by most people's standards, I am like a fan of the game because I consider it like a 7.5, somewhere between a 7.5 and like an 8 out of 10, you know.
Yeah, it sounds like you love it.
Yeah.
So I mean, you put it kind of in the same ballpark as Final Fantasy 15, which
Pretty
I think,
much. It has different flaws, but it's just like equally flawed.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. So it's really your preference of those flaws for sure.
Mhm.
But there's a specific dungeon right before you're about to get the pulse, and it keeps recycling the same exact room over and over again. And it's like a big round room, and it's literally the same exact layout. Like there's
Mhm.
nothing, there's not, no, they don't even like change the color of the bricks. There's nothing. It's a carbon copy room with
Yeah.
the same exact monsters at the center that you can't go around. And it's
Yeah.
the same same monster setup, and they have you do it like 9 times in a row, right?
It's brutal. Yeah.
Yeah, they don't even bother changing the dungeon at that point. They're just like, nope, we're just going to copy and paste the same room, and you're just going to loop through this 9 times until you're done. And it's stuff like that where I'm just like, why are you doing this? You know
Yeah.
that I don't enjoy this when you don't enjoy like putting out content like this, and it's there's no reason to do stuff like that. And once you get the pulse, the game gets a lot better, right? So why are you stretching this out? And it's when games do stuff like that that really drives me crazy for, because there's like no reason for it. I mean, even with like open world games, like Witcher 3, very classic RPG, right? Iconic. Some people would say the best RPG of the last decade. Very, very held in high regard. I love the game. Why the hell do I have to be at a signpost to fast travel? It's, I know it's supposed to be more immersive, but sometimes there's like miles in between the next signpost. And I'm like, dude, I just want to get to the town. I'm trying to go to bed. Like I want to get there, like and like they're trying to force me to like, you know, Dances with Wolves this thing, and I'm just trying to get to the next spot. And so, and I don't know. I think there's just things that games do like that, where every game has them in some regards. It's just, I guess how much of it is in there that really just drives you crazy.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Um, the the second part of this question, which I think you got on with what you were talking about a little earlier, was the games that maliciously waste your time.
Yeah.
And those are primarily mobile games, right? Like Genshin Impact, like you mentioned as an example. For me, that the last straw for those kind of games was Pokemon Go.
Oh,
I got into the Pokemon Go craze when that came out, like
did
millions
you
of other people did at the time, you
did
know.
you Pokemon go to the polls?
Um,
Never.
I mean, I voted, but not because of Pokemon Go.
There,
But
if people don't know what I'm talking about, and this is a quick tangent, and we'll go back to what you're saying, but there was a horrible like Pokemon, or it was a political ad back like 4 years ago. I think it was.
yeah,
I think I can't remember. I think it was Hillary Clinton that did it, but I don't think she came up with it. Somebody in her circle was trying to latch on to the Pokemon uh, excitement, and
yeah,
they somehow got her on camera saying Pokemon go to the polls, and people were
yeah.
just like, "Don't ever say that ever again."
So cringy, yeah.
Anyways, continue on.
Yeah, Pokemon Go is like a really bad example of a game that can waste your time. Now, in the beginning, you don't have very many Pokemon, so you're just walking around your neighborhood, walking down to the local park, spinning the Pokestops that are there and catching Pokemon. And at the height of the craze, you met other people who you just see them in the park walking around staring at their phone. So you know they're doing the same thing. You know, you go up to them, you meet them, you're like, "Oh, what Pokemon do you have?" whatever, and it's a good time. And your character levels up frequently, and they give you like items whenever you level up to help you catch the Pokemon.
Right.
But as you spin the Pokestops, you start getting an egg. Like you'll get these eggs. And the only way to hatch these eggs and get new Pokemon from them is to put them in an incubator. And an incubator only works, like it only progresses like hatching the egg when you take steps, when you walk around. So it's like all put together trying to make you play
Play
the
the
game
game.
more, right?
What about when you're just walking around? Because I never played the game. Does it? If you're just, do you have to be logged into the game?
Yeah.
Oh, so
Um,
it's not like you can just have it on your phone, but just be going about your business at the grocery store and it's hatching Pokemon eggs.
you had to be logged into the game, I believe so, unless they've changed it since then and allow Google to
Okay.
track you and like give you steps. I don't know. But
But at the time, you had to be logged in. Okay, I
you
got you.
had to be logged in. And these eggs, right? They give you 9 of them in your inventory. You can
Okay.
hold up to 9 eggs, but they only give you one free incubator to hatch them. If you want more, you have to pay, or you get like 1 or 2 every time you gain a level,
Okay.
right? Well, by the time you get to level 30, you need like millions of experience points to get a next level.
Mhm.
So you're not getting any more incubators for free. At that point, it's like, no, you got to pay or you're not going to get any.
All right.
And so they've gotten used to people have gotten used to being able to hatch eggs when they were lower level without having to pay because they were getting enough free incubators from leveling up. But then that kind of supply of free ones runs out, and now you feel like you're falling behind because your friends who you met playing the game, right? They're buying the incubators and hatching their eggs all the time and getting rare Pokemon that you still don't have.
Right. And now it'll take you like 9 years to get a
Yeah.
single egg hatched. Yeah.
Yeah, so they knew exactly what they were doing. They got you used to a certain level of progress, you know? And then at some point they were basically like, if you wanna keep going at the rate you were going, it's time to
It's time to pay.
it's time to pay. Yeah.
See,
And
but
that was like the last straw of these games. I don't know. I haven't really like gotten seriously into any free mobile game ever since because
yeah.
I was like Pokemon Go was the biggest one and it made like millions and millions of dollars, maybe even $1 billion. I don't know at this point. Like,
Yeah.
there's like everybody's going to follow that business model. And
Right.
Genshin Impact, which I played on console, I got to the point where it was like, yeah, to make good progress now, you need to pay like the monthly fee. Otherwise, you're just repeating the same steps and
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
not really getting anywhere. Yeah.
So see, that's like a mixed bag with me because I empathize with the frustration and I would have the same exact response. Like, I'm not doing that. That's a waste of time. And I'm not spending the money either. But at the same time, I think about it like, well, the game was free. I played it for this long.
It is.
I
Yep.
didn't pay anything, so there was no investment except me enjoying myself. And they're running a server, right? They're adding new content. That costs
Mhm.
money. So they have to get money out of you some way. So from that perspective, I understand the predicament they're in. Eventually, they can't just support a billion people, hatching Pokemon eggs because they have to make new content, right?
Yeah.
But the middle ground, I argue, is just make an offline version and I'll pay money for it all day, every day.
Yeah,
You know?
for sure.
Oh, just
Mhm.
not all day, every day, just one time. But I just
Yeah,
want to
like
buy the game and then that's it.
like one-time fee for between $10 and $30, right? To
Yeah.
just give me one incubator every day, right? Like
Yeah. What's
something
wrong with
or
that?
something like that. So I just have a regular, steady progress every day,
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and
But
they do give you the free one that you have, but
yeah.
oh, and then later they came out with like super incubators that could hatch them faster, and of course those were more expensive than the the regular ones. So they know exactly what they're doing,
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's almost, it's kind of crappy though, because I've almost like moved past that mentally because now there's games that you pay $60 for and then they still expect you to do that.
Oh yeah. Well, that's just
Like
drawing
criminal.
the yeah, that's just going way over the line. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
anyways, um, I think it's about time for our next question. How do you feel about that?
Yeah.
All right. So for our question from Joker, we have, what are some RPGs that you hated and yet you would still go back to play occasionally, or an RPG that is a guilty pleasure of yours? Stan, why don't we start off with you
Mm.
if you're ready?
All right. So I'm gonna answer the second part, which is the guilty pleasure of mine, an RPG that is a guilty pleasure.
Okay.
Um, I thought about ones that I hated and might go back and play, but hated is a very strong word. I don't know if there's that many that I hate and would actually go back and play. So for guilty pleasure, I actually have a game. I don't know if Hat has heard of this game, but it's a game by Atlas for PS2, and I believe it's also on the Wii, called Dokapon Kingdom.
Oh, that looks like a classic.
It's on there, but
I've heard
it's
of it. I've never played it.
oh, okay. So it is a kind of like an RPG board game, like almost like Mario Party. Like Mario Party meets an RPG.
Okay.
And so you play it multiplayer, right? And you can actually play with one controller and everybody can just pass the controller around, kind of like passing the dice if you're playing Monopoly or something, you know?
Okay.
And it's all about just backstabbing each other, betraying. You're all competing. You're like chosen adventurers of the king, and you're trying to help restore the king's kingdom and like regain his castles and his towns that have been overcome by monsters. But you can do all sorts of nasty things like unleash monsters on other players' towns that they've like liberated, or just like steal their items from them as you pass them on the map, or deliberately fighting other people and like doing mean things to them. Like you can, if you fight and defeat another player, you can like rename them or give them a stupid haircut or like draw on their face or whatever. Like it's really really crazy. Like the back of the box here that I have says play dirty, humiliate rivals, no multi-tap needed. Those are that's the selling points of the game.
This
Yeah.
sounds this sounds like a good game, Stan. Why is it a guilty pleasure?
I mean, it's like a very childish and silly game. You know, like there's no story to it. It's not very like mature. Like I don't know if you can tell by the box art. I'll try and put it up here, but it's like kind of very chibi like characters. You know,
Yeah. Very, very Bravely Default too.
I would say even more so. Like,
Yeah,
it's just
I was
very.
I was just joking with some of the criticism of
Yeah. Yeah. So that game is a guilty pleasure of mine. It's really long if you like do a whole campaign. It's actually not kind of unlike Mario Party. You can't just like play a map and finish it in like an hour or so. It's
Mhm.
like more of a longer campaign that
Right.
you'll come back to. And so I guess that's one downside is you kind of have to get 2 to 4 friends together, like in the same room,
So
to all
can you
play.
play it single player? Is it a
You can, it's just not nearly as fun, I think,
I
Like
gotcha.
you could play Mario Party single player with 3 computer controlled.
Dude, it's a blast.
Okay, well, I mean, every more
Yeah.
power to you, but
No, I don't play it
yeah,
like
so
that.
that's my guilty
Your
pleasure
guilty
game.
pleasure.
Yeah.
Okay, so for me, I have to agree with you on the point about the hating thing because
Mhm.
that's a very strong word. And if I really hated a game, I probably would not replay it.
Yeah.
However, I get the sentiment, right? It's a game that you like really don't really like that much, or you know that's not that good. And you'll even like get frustrated with it and you'll criticize it, but then you'll still like think about it and come back to it. And I could think of 2 games that fall into that domain. So the first one I'll talk about here is Final Fantasy 15. And the reason
Mhm.
I bring that up as a guilty pleasure is because, well, let me tell you a story, okay? I purchased this game basically not quite at launch because I didn't quite have a PS4 yet, but I bought a PS4 like a month or 2 later, and then I got Final Fantasy 15. And I don't know, maybe a month later. And so I was really excited about this game, huge Final Fantasy fan. I was following all the news. I was watching all the Dark Pixel videos. I was watching all the, the Final Fantasy Peasant videos. And I was getting super pumped about this game. I've been following the game since, when it was first announced, right? So I was very, very excited about this game coming out. And I bought it and I did not like it,
Mhm.
right? And you can actually hear my initial thoughts of like the vanilla version of the game. The day one version, pre-patched, none of the added content that they've added in later that everyone likes to talk about. None of that crap in there. We're talking about day one version, vanilla version. Me and Eric discussed that for 3 episodes, first 3 episodes of this podcast. And then I think for every episode after that, we at least devoted like 10 or 15 minutes to just trashing that game because we did not like that game. But there was something about it where I felt like there was something nice or something good underneath all the mistakes. There was a lot of promise there, or like a lot of potential with just the story and the world and the characters. Like there was something there that was real. I felt like that I wanted to be, I wanted it to be more than it was, and it just wasn't. And so I would get excited whenever there would be like massive updates, or every time there was some DLC added, like some big DLC, like the Prompto DLC or the Gladio DLC. I would go back and play those and get super excited and like be ready to like talk about them and everything. And even recently, with the book that just came out, I've been like sitting here thinking about, man, I kind of want to read that book. And I know that it's not going to be a good book, but I just like, I think like maybe after I read this book, you know, maybe after this will be the point where I'm like, all right, job's done. But it's just, I know that's not going to be it, but I find myself like thinking about the game occasionally, like, well, there's the PC version. I know it has the world editor, like map editor. I kind of want to go back through and create maps where I create basically like refugee camps, right?
Mhm.
To add into the game. So that way it'll like enhance the world building, because that was one of my major problems with the game where are all these people that abandoned the city? You know, they should be spread out all across this open world. So I was imagining trying to fix the game myself with like the map editor and creating quests and stuff like that. You know, even some of the follow-up stuff, like with the Arden's DLC, I really enjoyed. So I just like, I find myself feeling like they keep getting like a little bit closer every time some new content would come out. They're getting a little closer to what it should be, but it's still so far away. But I'm just like, I can almost see a coherent experience here. So I don't know what my fascination is with this, because I feel like it's really a 7 out of 10 game. And with all this like added content, it's like maybe like an 8 now.
Mm,
And, you know, there's lots of 8s out of 10 that I don't play anymore, you know?
yeah.
But even now, like they've added new content in it with like an act 3 of the story. And I kind of want to just replay the entire game with all the new stuff in there again. Cause I did do that one time, like a year after launch, but I kind of want to go back through and just replay the entire game and just, you know, pause where I'm supposed to put the DLC and do all that stuff and like replay it in its full form and really get an idea of what the final product is. And I think it's just because I think that there is actually something good there in that game. It's just muddled in a bunch of sloppy decisions.
Yeah, that's true. I kind of agree, actually, like with a lot of what you said. The book, I'm not so sure it's going to solve anything, because from what I understand, it's like it is like a what if scenario that kind of undoes the tragic ending,
Right.
at least. So that
Well,
isn't really gonna.
I haven't bought the book yet.
Yeah, I haven't read it either. I'm just going based off of how it was pitched or what people are kind of saying about it. But so I'm not sure that is going to like fix any issues with the existing story premise or anything. It's kind of just spinning it in a different direction. But yeah, Final Fantasy 15, it seems like it I agree with you, like it had the potential, the concepts and the story kind of outline and the characters to be like one of the best ones. I think that's why it feels so mediocre to like more series vets, you know, like long time FF fans, because you can see all the pieces, all the puzzle pieces are there. They just like when they didn't fit quite right, they just like put them together anyway, you know, just like
Well, there's
like so
just it's yeah, it's just there's things that drive you crazy.
yeah.
Like there's things like the movie that came out, Kingsglaive, had
Mhm.
one of the characters, like not the main character, another character, family member died trying to protect Noctis's family, right? And then like it's never referenced in the game. And that movie and like
Yeah.
hello, Final Fantasy's about like character arcs. That's a major thing that happened recently. What are we doing? You know?
Yeah. Yeah, and then of course Noctis is like not involved in the movie whatsoever, and then he finds out about the events of the movie through a newspaper, right? Like waking up in his hotel room and like, "Hey,
Which
did you see
would
the
have been the
newspaper?" And
same
it's like,
moment that other character found out about his father.
yeah. So it's just there, it has so many like little issues that just over time just like build up and like you said, bring it down to like a 7 or maybe an 8 with the new content that's been added since. I have only played the vanilla version
Oh boy.
myself, so I need to go back and play it at some point, like a complete edition or something. But
Apparently Act 3, from what I've seen, and this is the I think the last big dump that came out with the Royal version. It's I don't want to spoil the game, but there's the third act of the game. They've added a lot of new content with a lot of additional story stuff in it, with,
mm,
you know, some of the other side characters that they didn't get a lot of time with. And so kind of makes me want to go back and play it, you know, just new game plus it and just power my way through it, just story mode. So, but I don't know,
yeah,
that's the problem. Like I played that on the PS4, so I'd be tempted to do the PC version because I have
yeah,
my new PC and I just want to experience it in all its glory. But then I'd have to actually play the game again, which It's
Yeah.
fine, but is what it
Yeah.
is. So I did have another. This is a quicker, smaller one, but have you ever heard of the game Ergi's God Bless the Ring
That is
on the PlayStation?
a fighting game or like a brawler game?
Yes.
Okay.
So
Okay.
it's a fighting game that has like new characters and then also has Final Fantasy characters in it on the
Mm-hmm.
PlayStation. And I think that's probably why I originally picked it up, because I saw Final Fantasy characters on the back and I was like, whoa, it's got Cloud in it and Tifa, and they're like real sized. And that was the first time I ever saw that. So I was really hyped about that. But after I got done playing that, however long, there's a quest mode in it that is like a D&D style kind of dungeon crawler,
Okay.
but it focuses on these two archaeologists, and it's got a very basic setup. This man and this woman, and they're both archaeologists, and they're trying to uncover the secrets of these tombs. And it's just a multi-layered dungeon that's supposed to be like really old. And there's a town outside of it, and of course the town has like a place you can buy food, and it has an armor shop and like a magic shop. All the necessities to an RPG, but no actual living areas or anything. Just places you can buy stuff, right?
Mm.
But it's I don't know. Me and my cousin used to stay up late playing this thing, and we still do it when we see each other again. We'll still like stay up till like 3 o'clock in the morning playing this, trying to get to the bottom of the dungeon, because there's something about it that's really addicting. It's got a magic system that's basically the materia system from Final Fantasy VII, except it's an
Mm.
action RPG. So you can, buy this magic and attach it to you, and it's kind of functions in a similar way. And then it's got your standard fare of just regular equipment system, but it's got a really good game loop where you're just constantly trying to like buy that next piece of gear that's a little bit stronger. And once you get that new weapon, it's like, holy crap, man. I can like clear out like two more floors of the dungeon. Like I'm just wrecking stuff. And then you just start getting owned again. And it's a lot of fun, but it's really low budget. They used music from Xenogears in it,
Huh.
which I played that before Xenogears. So as a kid, I thought Xenogears took music from that, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of funny in that way. And there are some slight references to other Final Fantasy games. There's a hotel that's like your main quarters. And, that's where you switch characters and stuff like. And in the hotel, they reference a blonde haired man that's got a giant sword. I mean, it's obviously Cloud, right? But he likes to come to that hotel
Yeah.
from time to time. So I remember as a kid, like I used to think like, oh, if I play long enough, maybe I'll run into him, because why would they put that in the game? So anyways, I still enjoy that game. It's a good time. It's nothing, it doesn't have like an amazing story or world or anything like that. You're not gonna be seeing huge retrospectives on it, but it's a good
Right.
time to
Yeah.
kill like an evening.
Yeah. It's very niche, right? It's more of like a trivia question game. Like you're
Yeah.
gonna the name of the game comes up more often in a trivia question. Like, did you know what other PS1 game do Cloud and Sephiroth appear in? Right, and it's that one.
Yeah. It's like, let's really test the knowledge of these RPG veterans. Yeah.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me of another fighting game, Soul Calibur 3 on the
Okay.
PlayStation 2. It also had kind of an RPG mode, but it was more of like a tactical based
Yeah.
system where you send out your fighters to like conquer other bases. I think it was called like Chronicles of the Sword or something, if I
Yeah.
remember right.
I think I remember playing that version at a friend's house.
Yeah, and so we did kind of the same thing. Like everybody had their own character, and whenever your character met like an AI controlled like enemy unit, a Soul Calibur 3 battle would play out, and you'd have to defeat them, and then
Yeah.
your character could move on. But if they died, they'd like retreat back to the home base and you'd have to wait for them to come back. Yeah, so it was kind of a weird fighting game and a RPG
I,
crossover mix up. Yeah.
I wonder what inspires them to do stuff like that. Like it's really cool. I mean, I have good memories with that, but it's kind of an interesting dynamic. Like, oh, you can have this fighting game, or you could do this RPG. you know,
Yeah.
it's kind
Maybe
of
that was the
interesting.
beginning of just adding RPG elements to everything, right?
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, before
Yeah.
adding elements, they're like, let's just add an entire RPG to it. Then we'll slowly walk it back.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, so you want to move on to our next question?
Yep.
Okay. Agreed. All right, for our next question, we have, what video games have you beaten that you consider a hidden gem? This is from Paradise. Paradise adds also, if none comes to mind, what game do you think is underrated where gamers either should try or give another look at the game? So basically, what's a hidden gem that you can recommend? And if not, just a game that's underrated that you think other players should try.
So when it comes to hidden gem, there's one game in particular that always stands out. And I don't know if you can guess what I'm going to say, but it's Ogre Battle 64
Oh yeah, you always bring that
on
up.
the Nintendo 64. Yep. So special thanks to Paradise for asking this question, allowing me to once again shill for one of my favorite games. No, but thank you to everybody for all your questions. They're all really good questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, this game in particular it's a hidden gem because it's on a console that, quite frankly, doesn't have RPGs. I think there were like 4 or 5 RPGs ever released on it.
On the N64,
And really,
yeah.
Yeah, and really the only 2 that are worth revisiting, in my opinion, are this one, Ogre Battle 64, and Paper Mario, the first Paper Mario game. But Ogre Battle 64 was made by a company called Quest, the Quest Corporation,
Yep.
which is the original company where Yasumi Matsuno started. And for those who don't know Matsuno, he's the one who created Final Fantasy Tactics and Final Fantasy 12 for Squaresoft and then Square Enix. So
Yeah.
this game was the first game that they made after Matsuno left the team, like after he joined Square and went to go make Final Fantasy Tactics.
So I actually didn't realize this. I always thought that he made Quest 64 and then left Square and then left to go to Square. So he didn't work on Quest 64 at all.
He did not work on this one, Ogre Battle 64, but he
Quest 64.
Yeah, it's confusing because there's a company called Quest and there's also an RPG on the N64 called Quest.
That is not a good RPG. Ogre 64, Ogre Battle 64. My bad. That's what I meant. Yeah.
So apparently he left his notes like for where the story was supposed to go with the team, right? And so they were kind of trying to continue his story, right? With some success. I think they had some success doing that. But he had envisioned like at least like a 9-part series of games that was going to be the Ogre series.
Mm-hmm.
And we have 2 Ogre Battle games and 1 Tactics Ogre game, but they're part of the same world or storyline. But he had envisioned 9 games and we only ever got 3. So, or 3 or 4, I can't remember. But anyways, this game, Ogre Battle 64, is a great strategy RPG that has both real-time elements and turn-based elements. And the way it works is you create groups of soldiers and you send them out over a big map, kind of like a world map almost, but it's like a section of the world. And you send them from town to town, and the goal is to get to the enemy base and beat the boss. When you do that, you clear the map and then you go on to the next map. When your armies come in contact with an enemy army, it goes like into a turn-based battle separate screen where they attack each other. So that might sound like it takes a really long time, but the turn-based portion is automated. So you can't control like who your knight attacks or who your archer will shoot at. Instead, who they can hit is kind of determined by the formation that they're standing in. So I'm getting kind of into the weeds, but
yeah,
it's a strategy RPG.
Interesting.
Yeah,
I've never played it, so
it's a strategy RPG. So there's like a lot of depth to it, you know, and it has a class changing system similar to like a Final Fantasy Tactics. And the story is more on the mature, like political side. So you don't have like very many like goofy, you know, JRPG characters. They're more like in this. It's in Matsuno's writing style, even though he didn't write the game, right?
Huh.
So it's
But the
has a
stories,
serious tone.
the story's worth checking out though.
I think so. Like if FF12 or for strategy RPGs, right? If Final Fantasy Tactics and Final Fantasy and Tactics Ogre, right? Those are the two big ones that people really enjoy of Matsuno's. If those are like in the S tier of strategy RPGs, then this is like in the A tier. Like this is like a solid A right behind them. It doesn't quite have the same quality of writing or quality of translation as those other games do now that they've been, because they got
Right,
re-released
right.
and like updated with a different translation. So Ogre Battle 64 doesn't have that luxury, you know. It was
Sure.
only ever released the one time and then ported to the Wii and the Wii U. So you can get it on the Wii U, I think, for like $10 if you want to dust off the Wii U and play it. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's a really good
It's
game. It's long. Like these strategy RPGs tend to go long because the maps take forever to clear.
yeah.
You know.
Oh yeah. Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
This one though, like your characters kind of move slowly from one town to the next town, or like your stronghold, like towards the enemy base. But it has a day and night cycle on the map with like a clock in the corner.
Hmm.
So that kind of is like an abstraction to kind of help you like visualize or understand like, oh, how far they're traveling.
Hmm.
Like this mission took like 3 or 4 days, right, for us to go for us to clear this area of all the enemies,
Gotcha.
and like
Yeah.
liberate this region.
So it's kind of like Final Fantasy Tactics because Tactics has like a kind of a calendar system too, right?
Yes, it actually, and it does, like when you're on the mission selection screen and you move from one place to the other, it has the world has its own months and days to it, and so it'll show you like 8 days passed when you move from here to here.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting. See, that's a game that I often overlook just because I don't think about the Nintendo 64 as an RPG machine because it really wasn't. But that's not to say that there wasn't any RPGs on there. But when people do talk about the best RPGs on the Nintendo 64, I always see Ogre Battle 64 as, usually in the number one spot. So,
Yeah. Yeah, that's to me what makes it like one of the hidden gems, because I'm sure there are hidden gems on the PlayStation or on the PS2 or, on the Super Nintendo, but those are hidden because they're buried under a pile of amazing games, right?
right.
This is a hidden gem that's only hidden because anybody who loves RPGs didn't buy this console. So it's untested, it's untried by the many of the RPG enthusiasts out there, I think, right? Especially now that that there's more fans of the genre as
Yeah.
gaming has gotten larger.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's in a niche like subgenre of RPGs, the strategy tactical RPG.
Hmm.
And then even further than that, it's not a grid-based tactical RPG like Fire Emblem or Final Fantasy Tactics, which makes it even more kind of different and obscure.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, it's on a console that nobody bought for RPGs, so it's very hidden in my opinion. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's a fair assessment. I think also sometimes I've done this myself. I'm guilty of it. Is I'll think, okay, well, the Nintendo 64 had such lousy RPGs that okay, that's the best one of the lousy bunch. You know?
Yeah, I guess it's easy to think that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is great though. It's really good.
Okay,
I recommend it to everybody.
I'll take your word for it.
Yeah.
Very cool. So I can actually think of a few that I'd probably want to just point out. The first one is one that I would say is more interesting. It's definitely a hidden gem, but it's came out on the PlayStation. It was called Kildeka, and it's the prequel to the Shadow Hearts series. It's pretty interesting because it was written by the composer for Secret of Mana. He left a career making music to create his own game company, and he created the company that makes the Shadow Hearts game. And he came up with the premise for Kildeka, and he wrote the music for it, but then he left after the first game. Underneath some of the bad gameplay designs, it's a very interesting and good RPG. First off, obviously, just to knock out the basics, the music itself is actually quite good because it's one of the first games that used live instruments in the soundtrack. So it wasn't orchestrated. A lot of it's like guitars and stuff like that, but it's all live or instrumentation. So it's really good on that front. I think graphically, it actually looks really good too for a PlayStation game. The cutscenes are really good. It brought a lot of people from Square. They left Square and joined this company to kind of do this off project. And what's really interesting about it is he wanted to create something new. And so it's a horror themed RPG. And the entire game, it's 2 discs long. It takes place, well, I think it's actually longer than that. I've always emulated it. It's a couple of discs, but it takes place in this mansion. And it's kind of like a Resident Evil type thing almost, where you're in this haunted mansion and you're trying to uncover a secret in it. And there's like demons and stuff that are trying to kill you, but it's an RPG, and you and this other character are traveling through this mansion and you're trying to, like I said, unlock the secrets. But it's just a very interesting design to blend that with an RPG. But what sucks about it is they chose a Ogre Battle 64 type battle system for this type of game, or a Final Fantasy Tactics style battle system, where it's kind of like grid based like that, and you move around on a screen. Nothing wrong with that, but in that style of game, it has random encounters. So it's, dude, I'm telling you, it drags the whole game down, because you'll get into a battle and then it'll take like 20 minutes to end that battle. And then you'll take 2 steps and then you'll get into another battle. And it's another 20 minutes. And
that's not good. Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely not good. But if you're willing to put up with that, it's got a great story. The next game, the Shadow Hearts games, they got rid of that and went with it still got random encounters, but it went with a turn-based combat. And even that first Shadow Hearts game is not so much a hidden gem anymore, but it was at the time, because it only got released an initial shipment in the West, and then midway they canceled the Western version because it got a little bit of controversy with just how some of the religious themes and how graphic it was. It was an M-rated game, and they didn't want to bother with being on the front of the news or anything like that. So they just canceled it. But it's a really good game too. That one has Yasunori Mitsuda that did the soundtrack on it. So killer soundtrack, but similar type of horror theme, but more grandiose. Like you actually travel between, different cities, and it's more traditional in its setup. And that one's got an excellent story as well. So definitely go check those out if you want kind of a different take on the happy-go-lucky JRPG.
Yeah.
All right, so I want to take this chance to tell you about our media partner, RPGFan.com. If you haven't checked them out, they are a great source of RPG news, reviews. They have a lot of other podcasts on their website. In addition to our own, they have Random Encounter, which does more news and just general conversation. And then Retro Encounter, which goes through a book club or game club style podcast where they just go super in depth on a particular RPG. And then they have Rhythm Encounter as well, which does more music-based podcasts. And then they also, like I said, do reviews of RPGs going all the way back to the late 90s. They've had this website going since, I think, 1998. So a very long time. So you can go back and see reviews from games that came back out in like 1999. And sometimes they'll have like 5 or 6 reviews for the same game. So you can get different perspectives if you just like reading some nostalgic reviews, or some of your like latest reviews. They'll have stuff on there as well. And they're starting to do more on their YouTube page as well with video reviews. But written reviews wise, most recent reviews that they have are Collection of Saga, Final Fantasy Legend. So that was the Final Fantasy Game Boy games, the collection that just released in I think December, late December, mid December on the Switch. So I think they gave it around a 70. So not bad for Game Boy games. I enjoyed those games. So that's the most recent review. And then they also reviewed Ys 9 Monstrum Nox. So that's, like I said, a newer game that's coming out, I think, next week, right? Or in 2 days, 3 days, February 3rd,
On the 2nd, I
the
think.
2nd. Okay, tomorrow.
Yeah.
So you can go check that out as well. And then on their YouTube page, they have a variety of games on there. They're updating pretty frequently. The most recent game or video review that I checked out on there was Torchlight 3. They also did Cyberpunk, Star Renegades. Their crosscode review used some game footage. I was able to supply them. They did 7 Remake, 13 Sentinels. I did the game footage for Outer Worlds. A lot of great video reviews on there as well. So definitely go check them out. Love being media partners with them, and happy to work with them in the future. And I hope you guys go check them out. But I think other than that, we will be back next week with a new episode. We're going to go back to our standard format next week. And like I said at the beginning of this podcast, once a month, we are going to be doing these discussion, like question-based podcasts. So it'll be the last episode of every month, unless there's some epic news, Final Fantasy 16 trailer, or, the announcement of something else rather large that we think would take priority. We're going to be doing these question segments. And that's just because we got behind on questions and we felt like we just need an entire episode dedicated once a month to just kind of handle that. But if you would like to ask a question, there's going to be a link in the description of this episode, and you can go on there, join our Discord server, and you'll see podcast questions. Just ask your question there. If you want to ping or message Stan, he can, to make sure you get his attention, because he's the one that's handling the document for the question. So you can make sure the question gets on there for the next episode, or probably the episode after that, depending on how many questions we have. So
Yeah, and if for some reason you don't want to join the Discord, though we encourage you to, you could always put a question in the YouTube comments, and I can add it from there. But yeah, like I would encourage everybody to join the Discord because we have discussions that go after the podcast on there. So
yeah.
the conversation continues.
Yeah, I mean, if you ask in YouTube, my question to you would be, why not join our Discord?
Yeah.
Anyways,
But if you prefer to do it that way, I'll try and keep track and find your questions.
yeah. So definitely appreciate the questions this episode. Very helpful to have some unique and interesting things to talk about. Kind of gives us something different to discuss from our usual topic base. So we really appreciate everyone out there that contributes. Thank you. But I think that's going to wrap us up for this week. Like I said, we'll have a new podcast out next week, back to our regular format. We'll see you all then. Thanks, guys.
See you next time.